the theme of today? Let's see, is this, well, that one's on me. There we go. I'd hate to just stand up here and look good, but I would do it. Thank you, Heather. A number of times over the years, I have, as a pastor though, dealt with individuals that were asked or there was an opportunity for them to share a testimony. And that experience in particular early on has led me, if there are occasions or instances where that happens, I'm going to encourage whoever it is or ask them to write it out. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One is, if you're not accustomed to speaking publicly, your nerves take over, you have no idea how long you're talking. It's one thing to start talking, it's another thing to know how to finish talking. You've seen people that you can tell they're looking for the exit, but they just can't seem to take it, and they keep circling around and going on and on. And so writing helps you think through every aspect of what you're going to say. The other reason, though, is that it helps ensure that you get the main point that you're seeking to communicate, that doesn't get lost in the shuffle. And that became something that I would encourage people because of the incident I'm getting ready to describe. We had a man at our church in Charlotte. His name was Justa. Justa was a good guy, and to know him was to love him, and he just had an easygoing way about him and a good sense of humor, and this was just a guy that lived a good, honorable life, and he loved his family, he loved the Lord, he was faithful to the church, all those things. Long story short, he gets diagnosed with bladder cancer, and so he goes in for surgery, and they're going to remove the bladder. They do this, but it's important, and some of you have been through cancer surgery, it's important that you know the particular type of cancer that you're dealing with because that's going to affect the nature of the treatment. And so they send the bladder off for biopsy. Long story short, they lose the bladder. All I know is somebody is walking around the warehouse. Wonder what's in that cooler. Somebody found that bladder at some point is all I can say. Anyway, but for his purposes, it was lost. And so because of that, that meant that they were going to treat the cancer blindly and just kind of throw some stuff at it. And so he had some chemo treatments. I don't remember if he went through radiation as well. But long story short, he gets to the point he's cancer-free. And he's not angry and bitter with the hospital. I mean, he's frustrated, to be sure. Like, how do you lose an organ? How exactly does that happen? But he doesn't sue them. He's just a wonderful example of what it looks like in the face of difficulty to walk with and trust God. And so I thought this is a story that really needs to be shared. I want other people to hear about this. Others in the church, they kind of knew, but I wanted them to hear in his own words. So I asked him on this particular day to share. And so Justa gets up there, and he's not accustomed to speaking in front of other people. And so you can tell he's very nervous. But he gets up and he starts talking about, he says something about his childhood. He says something about when he got married. And he says something about his gratitude for the church. And then he sits down. Like, Justa, you missed the best part. It's like if you were to have lunch with the King of England today, and then tomorrow somebody says, "What'd you do yesterday?" "I don't know, I just had some tea and needed some more sugar in it." This is a huge detail that was failed to be mentioned, and yet that's how he was describing his story, but he left out some really important parts. When we're thinking about the resurrection, we're thinking about this aspect of the story of Jesus. And we are in Sunday school, we're telling it. In a Rise service this morning, we are telling it. And in this service, we are telling again and reminding ourselves what exactly it is that Jesus did. And every Easter and leading up to it, we are telling the story of Jesus and about his death, about his burial, about his resurrection. We are telling the story. And over the years how we tell the story. But here's the question. How exactly would Jesus tell the story? So if Jesus were telling the story, how would he do it? It's kind of an interesting question. And it's possible that we could just say, I don't really know how he would tell it. But the reality is, in the Bible, we get how Jesus tells the story. And it's not a typical place that we look to for an Easter occasion, but we see how Jesus tells the story in just 2 verses in Revelation chapter 1. Revelation chapter 1, look with me there, starting with verse 17. Revelation 1, verse 17, John says, when I saw him, he's talking about Jesus, I fell at his feet like a dead man. He laid his right hand on me and said, don't be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one. I was dead, but look, I am alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. That's how Jesus tells the story. But as he's telling it, what's he including? What's he communicating? What would he and what did he say about his resurrection? Based on what we have in his own words here, Jesus would say that he had an actual death and an actual resurrection. He experienced an actual death and experienced an actual resurrection. Now, these words come to us because God spoke to one of the disciples, John, somewhere around 95 AD, and John is exiled on the Isle of Patmos. Many of you are aware that the disciples of Jesus, all of them with the exception of John, get executed, get martyred because of their commitment to Jesus. John dies in exile, and he's old at this point. I mean, keep in mind, Jesus, the resurrection occurred 30, 35 AD, somewhere in that time frame. And we're at 90 to 95 AD. So John is old, and we're told as this book begins that the revelation of Jesus Christ, that God, he made it known by sending an angel to his servant John. So John is saying, listen, an angel came to me. But then he says, by the time you get to verse 10, he says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. I heard a loud voice calling, and he begins to describe that Jesus appears and manifests himself and communicates to him stuff that he needs to write down. And so we call this the revelation of John because it was the revelation that Christ gave to John, not only about what had, but in particular what was going to occur. Now, most of the time we think about Revelation and there's horses and bowls and seals and all kinds of stuff, and we're thinking about things like Armageddon and the end of time and a new heaven and new earth. But before you ever get to any of that, you had this instance where John, we're told, has this experience with the resurrected Jesus, and he says, I saw him. And when he sees him, he says that I fell at his feet like a dead man. You know, there are instances in our life where we get overcome with emotion physically. And it's like our emotions are so strong that they have physical expression that we almost effectively can't control. I'm sure you've seen it on the news where you'll have a soldier who has been away on deployment. Maybe they've been gone for a year, and they come back and they surprise their child at school, or their wife greets them on the tarmac or whatever, and they are just, it's like they collapse. They are so overcome with emotion. Think about this with John. It has been the better part of 60 years since he has seen Jesus. He was so caring for Jesus and so loved Jesus and so loved by Jesus that he was referred to as the beloved. And he has been committing the totality of his adult years to the point where now, as an aged man, he is sitting in exile and just going to die a lonesome, horrible death by himself. And Jesus appears. And it says that he falls to his feet. I've got to think that part of it was just the physical, almost uncontrollable response because of the emotion. I am so glad to see you. You are such a tremendous sight for sore eyes. I'm just overwhelmed. But beyond that, I think there's more to it than just the emotional weight of it. But he is seeing the resurrected Christ. And as he sees the resurrected Christ, it reminds us, I think, of language that we see in Isaiah. where when Isaiah has this vision of the Lord, because he recognizes who he is, and by comparison, man, I am so small and he is so great, just a position of humility, he just falls at his feet. And as he falls at his feet, Jesus lays his hand on me. So he takes his right hand and he says, don't be afraid. And then he says something kind of strange. I am the first and the last and the living one. That's kind of strange, maybe. If you hadn't seen someone in 60 years, what would you say? And Jesus says, I am the first and the last and the living one. That's kind of strange talk to communicate to John. Who in the world actually talks like that? I'll answer it with one word. God. God talks like that. In fact, in Isaiah 44, verse 6, we read this. This is what the Lord, the King of Israel and its Redeemer, the Lord of armies says, I am the first and the last. There is no God but me. And so back in Isaiah's day, he was communicating before anything was, I was. Before, long after anything else will be, I will be. That I am greater than anyone and everything. And as Jesus encounters John, first time he's seen him in 60 years, the last time that he had seen him has just been on the heels of this 3-year public ministry, on the heels of having seen him crucified, having Jesus say, hey, I need you to take care of my mother. And then he sees the resurrected Jesus and not again for another 60 years. And Jesus says, I'm the first and the last. I am the living one. That's God talk. And so as he is encountering John, he's communicating, hey, make sure that you understand this is not just the guy that you hung out with for 3 years. This is not just the guy that there were a lot of memories that were made and a lot of camaraderie that was shared. Not just close friends, but you have in me God the Son. I'm the first and the last. That's God talk. But then he says to him, beyond that, he says, I was dead, but look, I am alive forever and ever. This is a seemingly small detail, but it's an important and an essential detail. When Jesus says, I was dead, he's communicating the very simple thought that he experienced a real and actual literal death. That the death that he experienced on the cross was not a feigned death, did not just appear to be a death. I mean, there's more than 1 billion people on the earth that are teaching that. Islam teaches that's what happened to Jesus. They teach a Jesus that hung on a cross, but not one who died on a cross. But Jesus actually died, and he wants John to understand that as his side was pierced, long after those nails had been placed in his hand, that it was demonstrable of the fact that he had experienced a real death. And beyond that, he says, I have experienced what? Not only was I dead, but he says, I am alive and will be forevermore. I've experienced an actual death, and I have experienced an actual resurrection. Why in the world would Jesus, if he's telling the story, why would you include such kind of basic detail as that? I mean, couldn't he add some flourish, maybe? But when he's saying this, he's communicating what is most essential. Well, why is that so essential? Well, let me explain it this way. You're aware of the fact that I appreciate a good prank, right? It's one of my areas of spiritual giftedness. And so this particular prank, I haven't done this because I'm just too nice. Just entirely too nice. But pick some gift-giving occasion. Maybe it's birthday, maybe it's Christmas, whatever. There's a gift-giving occasion. There's somebody that you want to give a gift to. And what has happened over the years, one of the common gifts that we give now is a gift card, right? I mean, everybody's got everything. We don't know what they want, and so we're just like, here's an Amazon card, here's a Walmart card, here's a Visa card, whatever it is. So find something that you want. Get something in your size. Get something you don't have to return. And for this to work, it needs to be at one of those stores where there's plenty of stores, they've got all the gift cards there near the checkout, and you just pick one up. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but you can just pick that card up and walk out with it. It even comes with an envelope. You can pick that card up and you can walk out with it. And you can take that card, and you know this, you can write any amount you want to on it. $100, $1,000, $2, whatever. You can write that on there. You can put that in a Christmas card. You can put that on in a birthday card. And you can give it to someone, and they think, man, I have really gotten something. Holy cow, Michael is so generous. Look, he gave me $100 to Amazon. That is wonderful. And then you go to use it. And you discover, and it's worse, especially if you go to a restaurant. Somebody's giving you a restaurant gift card with no money on it. And you're like, yeah, I'll have dessert. Just put it on that. I'm sorry, there's nothing on that card, sir. I'm not suggesting, again, I haven't done this. I'm aware of people who have done this. I am too nice. But now I'm afraid if any of you give me a gift card, it is, I'm going to have a stack of them this week. I'm checking the balance. Reagan said, trust but verify. Anyway. If we don't have an actual death of Jesus and an actual resurrection of Jesus, it is effectively him having given you a gift card with no money on it. Why? Because your sins have not been paid for. That which you have done that has separated you from God, you still remain separated from God. And I don't know if you forgot about this, but you've got one day less to live than yesterday. And at some point, you're going to need some help with this whole death thing. And if you want to experience life when this time is over, you'd better have some help from somebody that's stronger than that. And if you're going to experience victory over death, it's only going to happen because someone who has experienced victory over death shares that victory and that ability with you. And that's why Jesus says to John, as he's telling the Easter story, as he is telling his story, he's saying, listen, I'm the first and the last, I'm the living one. I'm greater than anyone and anything. That's God talk. And he says, I did die. I experienced a real, actual death. And because of that, sin's debt has been paid. But I am alive and I will be forevermore. So that means I just didn't beat it for a little bit. I am still alive. And because of that, that victory can be shared with you. And as Paul describes in 1 Corinthians 15, if that were not the case, if he is not risen, well then, among other things, your faith, all of this is futile. And it is only in this life that you would have hope. How would Jesus tell the story? Well, he would say that he had an actual death and experienced an actual resurrection. But he communicates another thing, and that's this, that he gained control over what controls us. He gained control over what controls us. Now, that first statement is essential, that Jesus experienced an actual death and an actual resurrection. And that has to get settled, and that's the foundation for what follows. Because he says, in view of that fact, having experienced life and victory over death, he says, I now hold the keys of death and Hades. Now, some of your Bibles may render that word Hades differently, depending on which translation you're looking at. The word Hades there is Greek, and it is the equivalent of the Old Testament word Sheol. Sheol was understood to be the realm of the dead. And so if you take that phrase and put it back in here, Jesus is saying, I have gained control. I have the keys of death and the realm of the dead. Now, we could get stuck in the weeds here, but I just want to kind of keep it simple to say this, that I believe that as Jesus is communicating that, the aim is to think of that as one singular thought, that death and the realm of the dead is a singular thought. So, for example, I would like to thank you for your effort and energy that you put into making Friday night possible. I'm actually thanking you for there's two different things, but we want to think about them as one category. And so when he says that he has the keys to death and Hades, or Sheol, the realm of the dead, think of that as one thought. And in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, both of these are described, and the Psalms, and in particular in Isaiah, both of them as having gates. Having gates. Gates are interesting because they accomplish two things, or one of two things, or actually both. They keep things or people out, and they keep things or people in. And there's a sense in which death, both of this realm of the dead, there's a sense in which that gate works both ways. It traps people. It contains people, and it keeps others from you're separated. And Jesus says that he has gained the keys over these things. Every single one of us has some moments in life where, and hopefully these get fewer as you age, but you've got some moments where looking back in the rearview mirror, you ever think, how was I so dumb? I mean, some of you look at your marriage license and say that, but I don't know. But like you look back and you're like, what was I thinking? How could I be so stupid? I've got a few of those instances, very few, but I do have a few of those instances. And one of them, I think in part I had shared with you this one time before, but I loved when I was a kid playing cops and robber stuff, and I had walkie-talkies and cap guns and stuff. I even had a pair of handcuffs, like real handcuffs that I thought were pretty awesome. And I loved this. And if school was out, typically my sister and I would be staying at my mother's parents' house. And on this particular day, I had all my stuff with me, including those handcuffs. And I don't remember any of the setup, how exactly this happened. All I know is that I wind up with one handcuff on my wrist and the other one is attached to the doorknob. And my sister has the keys. And I had to sit there for an entire episode of The Price is Right. And I would ask about and would anticipate getting let out, but I couldn't. And then she would do things like this. What's she saying? I got the keys. She was also saying by that, you're not getting them. But by doing that, she was communicating that what bound me, what constrained me, what kept me locked up, she had control over. And it communicated that if I was going to experience release from this, it would have to come from her. But there she was, taunting me with them. Hold that thought for a moment. As Americans, particularly, the wealth of our country and of our culture is such that we have been able to insulate ourselves from so much pain and tragedy and suffering that so much of the rest of the world experiences. I mean, you get dehydrated, you can go right now over to urgent care and get a bag of fluids and you'll bounce right back. There's people today in the world that are going to die because of just simply getting a stomach bug and getting dehydrated. We've got all sorts of advanced medicines and technologies that help us where we're not, our children being born and dying in the process of childbirth is comparatively rare compared to other countries. And then we've got all this technology that affords us so much safety. And we've got a country with a massive army and defense system so that we're not worried about other countries coming in and taking us over or bombs flying over. So there's so many fears that other people are dealing with that we are not. Beyond that, we've got a pill for everything, don't we? I mean, we just do. Your head hurts, we got a pill for that. You're too fat, we got a shot for that now. And so like we've got something for everything, right? And so we insulate ourselves from so much. And if you're going through difficulty, there's counseling for that. There's somebody that you can talk to. And there's so many difficulties that we are able to either bypass, minimize, or to mitigate, but we still come to this point. We die. People you love die. And we might be able to kick the can down the road. We might be able to postpone or delay it. We might be able to push it down a little further, but we still have that reality that at some point, my time, your time, our time, here, it is going to end. And we cannot change that. We are stuck in the gate. We are still bound by death. That controls us. That limits me. That limits you. And Jesus is not sitting over there doing this saying, oh, I got the keys. He's saying, I have the keys. And as he came to John, he puts his hand on you as a gesture of comfort to say, I have the control. I have the power. I have the authority over that which ultimately binds and constricts you. Is there any reason that we call this good news? That's exactly why we call it good news, because the good news is that he gained control over that which ultimately controls us. And he comes to us where we don't have to be afraid, and he puts his hand on us and he says, I have the keys, not to taunt us, but to grant to you release. That's why he said it this way, that the one whom the Son sets free, they are free indeed. Man, that's good news, isn't it? That's why we call it the good news. But that's how Jesus tells the story. I ask you very simply today this: what have you done with the story? You might be aware of those details. You might be aware of the scriptures that we've heard. But what have you done with it? Has this good news become your reality? That Jesus actually died and actually rose for you. That he gained control over what controls ultimately you. Jesus wasn't merely communicating facts. He was communicating facts that have real application, that make a real difference. Have you allowed it to make a real difference in you? Will you bow your heads with me?